This should be tier 3, the intensive interventions. This is what happens when things haven't worked at tier 1 and tier 2. Okay, when you've tried the prevention piece and you've tried the early identification intervention pieces, when you've done all of that and it hasn't worked to the point where kids are returning to regular attendance, this is when you get to tier 3. And this is the referral to SARB, and then beyond that to a truancy mediation program if you have it, or prosecution. So when you look at the referral to SARB, students can be referred if they are habitual truant, irregular in attendance, or habitually insubordinate or disorderly at school. Again, referrals should be made only once you've exhausted school site options. In terms of the documentation that should be in place to take a case to SARB, these are examples of the different types of things that you should have as part of that. Some of you may have systems where you can push a button and say generate SARB report, and it collects all the information for you and spits it out in one nice little packet. Others of you may not have that yet, but could be something down the line that would make your lives a little bit easier. But this is why, because SARB is going to be looking at all this information, this is why at the site level you have to do all of those intervention steps. Because they're going to want to see attendance contracts that you've put in place, they're going to want to see your notifications, they're going to want to see all of the site level meetings that you had, the attendance records, and other supplemental information. They're going to want to see everything as part of that process. So if you haven't been doing all of those steps or haven't been documenting them, there's going to be pretty glaring gaps in what you turn in with your SARB referral. And that may lead to the case getting kicked back to you. So with the screening, typically it's the SARB chairperson who screens the SARB cases that are coming in from the school sites. The case needs to be screened to ensure that everything due process-wise has been taken care of. If the documentation is complete, then a meeting should be scheduled. If the documentation is inadequate, the case can be kicked back to the school site. So it's not an automatic that once you complete the referral that it's going to go forward. It should be screened to make sure that it has all the components that it should have. If you are the person responsible, supervisor of attendance, who's responsible for your SARB meetings, you have some organizational responsibilities. You are to make sure that you have established membership and outreach to agencies to fill vacant positions. Pretty soon we'll get to who should be sitting on your SARB. If you're missing people, it's your responsibility to reach out and try to get those positions filled. You need to establish an annual meeting schedule and location. So are you meeting once a month? Are you meeting twice a month? Are you meeting once a week? I think at Kern, at different points of the year, you're almost meeting every day toward the end of the year. So depending what works for you, and thinking about the location, where are you holding your SARB meetings? How many of you hold them at some kind of district or school site? Raise your hands. How many of you hold them at a police station? Okay, how many of you hold them? Whoa, okay, so you can get creative with the location. Some people will use a community center. Some people will use a school facility. Some people will use a city hall location. There's actually a SARB that's down in Southern California. They hold their SARB meetings in a courthouse. Like, parents have to line up and go through a metal detector and go into a courtroom, and that's where they hold their SARB meetings. It is for real. And they are a kind group of people. They are very nice, and they are very willing to work with families. But holy cow, walking through a courthouse is very scary for families. So thinking about where that location is and what message comes with that, it can work in a variety of different ways. You just have to figure out what works in your community. Develop a system for record keeping and storage. So with these cases, you're going to be receiving all this documentation. How are you keeping it? How are you storing it? How are you maintaining confidentiality? You don't want this information just open and available for everyone, so think about how that looks. Maintaining data for the annual SARB report. So attendance supervisors are going to be responsible for putting together the SARB report. Where are you maintaining the data to be able to do that? Reviewing data and setting goals for SARB, and then that inventory of community resources. Again, you're the attendance supervisor. It fits nicely with the SARB work. So those are going to overlap. SARB panel composition. So if you are a county SARB, which we have established, we don't have yet in Kern, but maybe sometime. Local SARBs, so this is who you are, may include but need not be limited to all the following people. And you'll see with this graphic, it's not just school people. It's our agency partners. It's community-based organizations. This is a different group of people than our parents are used to seeing. So typically when they come to school and have a conference or even the SARTs, it tends to be our school-related folks that they see on a regular basis. When they go to a SARB meeting, it's a different group of people. Those groups of people bring in different resources, bring in different expertise. You'll notice these are kind of highlighted in the green. These were added within the last few years, public defender and district attorney. Okay. Again, it says may include, so that doesn't mean that you are required to have every single person, but as much as possible, you want to fill those positions. Reach out if they say we can't send someone to your meetings. It is what it is, but you've tried. If you are the SARB chairperson, again, those data pieces, review the procedures for SARB meetings. Make sure that the meetings stick to the agenda. It's real easy in SARB cases for things to kind of go sideways, so you kind of help keep everything on track. You are responsible for helping to set the tone for the SARB meetings. It should be firm but fair and focus on improving outcomes. Encourage people to be active participants, create SARB directives, and follow up with cases. So if you are the SARB chairperson, this is part of which you need to be responsible for as well. So SARB members, this just lays out for you why we have these different representatives on SARB. I'm not going to read them all to you, but you have a sense of what role they may play. We kind of group them together. So again, the idea behind this is really that you have a well-developed, diverse group of people who can assist with any of the number of different things that will come up during the course of the SARB meeting. We have our social services, probation, parent reps, community-based agencies, everybody that you can possibly have. I currently sit on a SARB in the city where I live, and that SARB panel has 30 plus members. And the reason there's 30 plus members is because there's 500,000 people in the city and 75,000 kids. But with that, it's also important that you have people there that can address, especially in the city that I'm in, the different regions of the city. So just because you have a mental health person, maybe that mental health person only operates in a certain geographic area. So we have to make sure that there's 4 mental health people that represent the different parts of the city, because we can't refer a parent who lives here to go to services, 20 miles away. That's just not going to be effective. So you have to think about those kind of considerations too. If you are geographically a large district and you have different parts of the city or different agencies that deal with different parts of the city, you may want to think about that as well. With SARB collaboration, keeping in mind that information regarding pupil records can be shared with members of the SARB. So this is how our agency folks that participate on SARB are allowed to have access to attendance records, information about the student, those kind of documents because of this education code. So if you are officially part of the SARB team, you have access to that. You also may choose to use a confidentiality form. A lot of districts have gone to this because it's not intended to be water cooler talk. It's kind of like Vegas. What happens in SARB stays in SARB. So if you are interested in a form for confidentiality purposes, let me know. I don't think that's on your flash drive, but I can get it to you. Also keep in mind that a lot of families who have been referred to SARB already have had interactions with some of these agencies. They might have an open case with CPS. They might have had law enforcement interaction. Could be that a parent's on probation. Could be a lot of different things. So keeping in mind that those people are going to come to the meeting with information that's going to be useful to you about their interactions with the family. Okay? And again, keeping in mind most people that sit on SARBs are mandated reporters. Sometimes at SARB you hear things that you didn't think you would hear, or things are said that need to be reported, keeping in mind who's going to be the person responsible for reporting that and for the follow-up of that piece. In preparing for SARB meetings, the individual meetings during the year, try to confirm attendance of the SARB panel members and the school site representatives. So again, this is kind of the district function. Contact families to confirm their attendance. And you may need to do this 2 or 3 times. Sometimes once isn't enough. You send a letter home, you may need to do a follow-up phone call, you may need to do a call the morning of, make sure that they come. Prepare documentation for the panel members. Some people do this paper copy, some people have gone to an electronic version, and they will have a file for each kid on a laptop, and when their SARB panel comes in, they can look at the information online. Arrange for translation if needed. If you know that a family speaks a language other than English, make sure that you have someone there that can translate that information. Comply with the Brown Act requirements, and we'll talk about that next. So with Brown Act, okay, so I'm going to say this based on the recommendation of State SARB. State SARB says that SARBs are subject to the requirements of the Brown Act per the government code. There are people out there, specifically the county council for Orange County, who says this is not true. Everyone has agreed to disagree. State SARB's position officially and in the handbook is that you are subject to the requirements of the Brown Act. So that's why when we do this, we talk about this. If you have counsel attached to your district, your attorneys who say you don't have to do this and will stand behind you if something happens, more power to you. With the Brown Act, you need to make sure that you are posting 3 days in advance information about the meeting. You are only to act on the items on the agenda. You can briefly describe the items that are going to be discussed, so student cases related to attendance. Make sure that there is no identifiable information about the student. So you cannot put, case 35, John Brown from, Smith Elementary School. Don't do anything like that that would be able to identify the student. You need to indicate on there that student cases, so when you're talking about the cases, would need to be discussed in closed session unless otherwise requested by the parent in writing. So typically on an agenda, you might have an open agenda, open session, where you could talk about any updates related to SARB or any conferences or resources that your panel members would need to know about. And then you typically go into closed session where you do the student cases. So with the student cases, again, nothing identifiable, but you want to make sure that you're, case 1, 2, 3, 4, and using some kind of system that doesn't allow the student to be identified, but you're still notifying the public that the meeting is happening. In terms of the tone, again, firm, cordial, and fair. Use a consistent procedure when you're conducting the meetings. You might want to think about using a script at the beginning just to begin and say, we are here to discuss the attendance of your student according to education code, blah, 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 and you read off a little sample piece just to make sure that every meeting kind of starts the same way and you're providing the same basic information. Once you get into the actual details of the cases of each student, obviously that part's not going to be scripted. But you might want to start that piece out for consistency, particularly if you're a new SARB chairperson and you're not as familiar with some of the terminology or the codes. It just helps to have a backup. During the process, encourage panel members and families to participate and be a part of the larger discussions. And then, again, just a reminder about what the purpose of SARB is. So what takes place in a meeting? Here we go. So if you follow the lines there, that's what typically takes place in a SARB meeting. If you have never been to a SARB meeting, either you haven't presented a case, you haven't participated, you haven't been there, this is something you're going to want to do so that you're familiar with the process and what it looks like. If you can secure a little bit of release time to be able to do this, if that's what's required, at least it gives you a sense of what to expect when you're called to go to a SARB meeting. So generally what happens, the SARB chair explains the purposes of the meeting and everyone introduces themselves. The family is reminded why they're going to SARB. Attendance is reviewed, interventions are reviewed. The family has a chance to talk about the school has done ABC, XYZ, and attendance hasn't improved. Family, tell us why the attendance is not improved. Tell us in your own words why, after all of these interventions, we're still not seeing an improvement. So they need to be able to discuss Here's why it hasn't happened. The panel is going to discuss solutions and referrals. A contract will be created. You'll explain what the follow-up procedure is. You'll explain the consequences of failing to do so, and then the meeting will be concluded. So that's typically what happens during the course of a SARB meeting. Depending where you are and how much time you have allocated, I would say the average time for a SARB meeting is probably 30 to 45 minutes. Some of you may say, no, it's not, it's 15, because that's all we have. You make those determinations. Depending on the case itself, especially because you've already had these interventions, you have an idea of how complicated the case is going to be going in. If you know that it's a complicated case, give yourself some extra time for that, because you don't want to have people backed up in your hallway, because you got behind on your cases. So thinking about what takes place at those SARB meetings. So you get into a really fun realm. The issue with HIPAA is that you can't get information from the doctor without a parent consent. So that's kind of a HIPAA issue. If a parent says, that they're taking their child to the doctor and they do happen to give you the name of a doctor, you can at least call that medical office and confirm if there was an appointment. If they're giving you the name of a doctor, they won't tell you what they're seeing them for or what they're treating you for, but it's not a violation of HIPAA to just confirm that that parent is actually taking that child to medical appointments. So that can give you like a little bit of leeway to work with. If a parent absolutely refuses to work with you and refuses the release and all of those kinds of things, that may be where your school staff could do some minor assessments with the kid. Your health nurse might be able to tell based on the reactions that the student is having, whether they're having any kind of respiratory distress, if there's symptoms, if there's triggers that are happening, if they're coming into the school office because one of the bad health days or something like that. You can try to work around it that way. I mean, ultimately, if the parent refuses and the absences continue, you could take this beyond the SARB level to the next step, and maybe being at that step will force the parent to do a little bit more. In terms of like a health and wellness check kind of thing, like a CPS thing, I mean, we have someone from CPS here. If you had enough proof to be able to show that there was any kind of medical negligence or something along those lines, they might take a case. I guess it would depend on what you had to work with. So those might be your different avenues to go, okay? So this is just one example of a SARB type scenario. Other ones, this was a medically related one. I know we have ones of kind of like an out of control kid. Was that your case? Out of control daughter, ditching classes, had good attendance, went to poor attendance, falling asleep, drug use, boyfriend, all those kinds of things. What immediately pops in your mind about this? Drugs. Who's the boyfriend? In this case, potential human trafficking. This was actually a human trafficking case at the SARB that I sat on. Young girl. Yeah, we actually looked up her social media account and found pictures of her like half naked in bed with guns and drugs. It was awful. She got into a program with the local law enforcement because of what we saw and who she was involved with and what that included. It was someone who was actually pimping her out. So these kinds of cases happen in SARB. That's a pretty extreme case, but it's not entirely unusual for SARB. So when you see some of these things, it might trigger different responses for you. Because we're running out of time, we're not going to be able to run through all of those, but I wanted to just really quickly with that one. And this was a male student, 7th grader, fighting. Parent was no-show. Siblings, a lot of movement between the schools. This was actually a case, for those of you that had this scenario, this was actually a case of domestic violence where the mom kept moving from site to site, school to school to get away from her significant other. The student had seen a lot of this domestic violence and started acting out himself by getting into fights and causing problems on campuses. The mother was doing the best that she can, trying to work 2 jobs and provide for her family, but the kids were unsupervised and he just went completely off track. So again, due to time constraints, sorry, those were kind of an abridged version. But just to give you a sense of the different types of cases that can go forward to SARB. So this is why, for those of you that have not participated in a SARB meeting, you may want to, because you're going to see scenarios like this. Alternative educational placements. So again, thinking about if that's a component during the SARB meeting, it may be a consideration. One thing I want you to take into account, particularly in regards to independent study, be very, very careful before agreeing to place a student on independent study, largely because of the social emotional factors. What we've seen with a lot of kids is the parents will request independent study or the students will request it. The school says, okay, we'll give it a shot. But the problem is a lot of these kids are avoiding school because of mental health issues. They're depressed, they're anxious, there's stuff going on. And then when they do independent study, they're even more isolated. They're at home. A lot of times they're unsupervised. We actually saw in LA County in the school-age child deaths, when we research those and we look at those case studies, at one point in LA County, over 50% of the child suicide cases were kids who were on independent study, okay? So that caused like a big concern. They actually sent out a lot of notices out to school districts saying, please be very careful. I'm not saying that that's the case everywhere or even in this county, but just be very careful when you're looking at alternative placements that it's in the best interest of the student and that you are asking questions to the family about how they're going to supervise, how they're going to make sure that the student is okay and is not socially isolated, making sure that this really is in the best interest of the student and not just a different way to avoid going to a regular comprehensive campus. SARB directives. So after you put all of this together, you're going to formalize this into a contract with SARB signed by these following people. If you're making recommendations on the SARB directives about what you want to see happen, like maybe you're saying parenting project or you're saying something along those lines, be very careful about any directives that would violate laws regarding student fees. Okay, so if you're mandating something, you have to make sure that it's not negatively financially impacting the family. So if you say you need to go to parent project, then you are making a referral and you're not asking the parent to pay for that. Okay, so just be careful about what you write in there and what you're asking people to do. Follow-up steps. So in following this, you want to make sure you have someone assigned to doing the follow-up work for the cases. It's a good idea to send a letter with the SARB directives again to the family after the meeting. And this is a tool that's used in various parts of the state. These are SARB stickers that are actually put in the CUME folders that identify when a student went through SARB, what the name is, who the contact person at the district is, what the date was, so that if that student leaves, which happens, right, at SARB, there's a lot of attention and then families are like, I gotta get out of here and go somewhere else. At least when they ask for the CUME and the CUME gets forwarded to the next district, if you see this, then you know that the process was already in place and you can pick up where they left off. So this is a really good tool to be able to use, and if you use this consistently, then it'll save you some time. This is not. This was something that was created in the county, so it could be something that Sal or somebody comes up with. They're just little peel-off stickers. We used to make them sheets of, like hundreds of sheets of these and give them out at the start of each year, and that way people could use them, so maybe that's something Sal can follow up with. Check student attendance and or behavior on a regular basis. Follow up on the directives. You want to make sure that you're checking, you know, if you asked families for resources, did they follow up with it? Was all the necessary paperwork filled out? Are there any new additional needs that the family might need? That's part of that case management piece. It's always great when SARB can recognize families for improvement. I've seen this be very, very effective, where at the end of the year, SARB actually holds a recognition ceremony for the kids who have improved with their families. So just the way you called them in when their attendance wasn't good, call them back in at the end of the year when it's improved. I would recommend doing it right after the school day so they're not missing school. Do it at like 3:30 and ask them to come and give them a letter or certificate. If you can get donations, something like that works. If through the processes of tier 1, 2, and 3, you're still not seeing an improvement in attendance and you're having continued problems with that, Education Code does allow for following steps. So there are additional steps to the process. Non-compliance with the SARB directives can lead to a referral for legal recourse. You also may, through your district attorney's office or probation, they could participate in a truancy mediation program. Again, I know that's not in place right now, but could potentially be in place down the line. In terms of legal consequences, this is just a graph of what they look like. I'll let you take a look at that at your leisure because we're running out of time. And then consequences for students. This is what's laid out in educational code, vehicle code. The annual SARB report, again, as supervisors of attendance, you are responsible for putting together information for the annual SARB report. That information needs to go to your county office. There are a couple different formats for that SARB report. They are in the state SARB handbook, which is on your flash drive. Typically, the county office will send out something, usually in like March or April, and say, please make sure by the end of the year you fill this out and send it in. They're responsible for compiling the information and making sure that they have that, so just look for that from someone from your county office towards the end of the year. Closing thoughts, here are some attendance resources. Again, I pulled from all of these areas onto your flash drive, so you have a lot to start with. You can go back in your spare time and take a look at all of these too. If there's anything I missed, you can add to it. Everything can stay on your flash drive. Model SARBs throughout the state of California. Again, we have 2 of them in the room. So Kern High School, McFarland, those are a couple of examples, but these are also examples. By being a model SARB, they have committed to mentoring other SARBs, so you can always call them, talk to them, visit them, observe them. And Sal mentioned this already. There's some flyers over there for other CWA workshops. Student discipline is October 5th, a full day focused on all of the steps of the discipline process, from investigation through suspension, through expulsion, through county appeal. Legislative update. That's going to be a look at all of the new pieces of legislation that are going through this year that will impact student services. So if you are wanting to know what those new laws are and how they're going to affect you at your districts, this is a good presentation. It's half day. In January, there will be a student records custody and residency full day workshop. This would be a good one to bring your registrars, enrollment clerks, administrators responsible for this. That's a good training for that, and then Section 504 in March. So a lot of different things that are available to you in terms of the student services realm. This is me. This is the company that I co-founded. We do trainings and workshops across the state in all of these different areas. So you'll see we cover a lot of different stuff. If you have questions or concerns about these areas, or you wanted to see potentially about having us assist with any of that, please let us know. This is my name and contact information, phone number. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions. I thank you for being here. I know Sal printed some certificates to show that you went through this training. This meets the requirement for certification within Kern County. So thank you for taking your time to be here today and being so attentive. Please feel free to take all the resources with you.